WWT presents Partner Spotlight.
Welcome to another episode of WWT Presents Partner Spotlight. My name is Clint Huffaker, Practice Manager of Application and API Security here at Worldwide Technology. Today we're going to be talking about APIs and API security. APIs have really become the backbone of modern digital interactions, connecting everything from your morning coffee purchase to streaming services to digital and AI transformation, taking place in the enterprise and across the globe. However, the rise of API-centric architectures has drastically expanded the attack surface, meaning traditional security measures are no longer sufficient. And that's where today's conversation starts off. First, a quick intro to our guest. Chuck Herrin is with F5. Chuck is a field CTO at F5 and recently joined via the acquisition of Wib. Wib brought the full API lifecycle capabilities to the market as part of F5's distributed cloud. And my colleague, Traci Byrne, Traci leads WWT's effort to define, build, and activate our security strategy and go-to-market. She's also the wonderful host of another popular podcast series here at WWT called Meet the Chief. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out after you watch this episode. Chuck, Traci, thanks for joining. So I'll start off today. So before we really dive into how we secure APIs, let's kind of level set a bit. Chuck, in a recent article that I was reading earlier this year, you had said that APIs were kind of the hidden central nervous system of modern digital lives. What implications have come from the rise of API software, where APIs are really the first thing to think about how they interact in really all the areas of business, and how is that changing the state of cyber in general?
It's a great question. Thank you for having me today. I think a lot of what's changed in the last several years, really in the last 5 to 10 mostly, is the architecture of applications have changed. The advantages that API-centric development bring to the enterprise are many and manifold. So if you've been in IT for a long time, you probably remember, and some of you maybe still have the upgrade projects of monolithic apps where everyone has to come together at the same time and upgrade the apps. By breaking these out into microservices and then using the APIs between those services, teams are able to abstract a lot of the technology, move much more quickly, make things quicker, more reliable, scale easier. All of these things that are behind this API first series of development have really increased the ability of businesses to bring business value much more quickly through their applications. But the application architecture drives your attack surface. And this is where defenders have gotten behind, is as these architectures have changed the way that the applications work and the entry and exit points of data from these applications, many defenders haven't kept up with that change. And it's exposed a big gap between modern development practices and how most defenders are actually monitoring their application and API inventory today. And it leads to a lot of blind spots.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think as WWT, we really take kind of a secure versus a defend methodology, right? Where you're really thinking of the common, industry term shift left. It's over in your secure opportunity, and then your defend is defending everything in runtime. So Traci, I'm kind of interested to know, what are some of your biggest challenges that you see from clients you're talking to as it relates to API security, and how is it impacting their business?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we're seeing out there is just a huge amount of API sprawl. And the challenge with that is it comes down to visibility and control, and being able to really defend these environments. Because as we proliferate the use of APIs for absolutely everything, and I know we'll talk about it later, but AI is a huge is another huge vector that leverages APIs. The attackers are just as advanced, so they're using the same tools that the developers are to be able to really understand the logic of the APIs and look for vulnerabilities. So it just really puts us in a position where we have to have visibility, control, and be able to defend against it. So from our perspective, the customers that we support, there's huge concerns around it because it's in the headlines all the time. We've seen breaches that are based on API attacks from every industry, including telecom, banks, hyperscalers. And these attacks, they not only impact their own organization and their own, IT groups, but it's all of the consumers of those, of their services and products. So it's a huge challenge they're facing.
Yeah, no, great point. I think it, as we commonly see when talking with customers as well, it kind of comes back to the fact that the attackers are actually ahead of us. right? And in many cases, the developers have been in front of infrastructure, which is where a lot of our defend mechanisms are placed, right? So it's really about shifting that focus and truly understanding from a visibility standpoint that you mentioned, Traci, and then getting a true, posture of everything is kind of that next phase on how to move forward. So as we look at that growth, and particularly the rise of generative AI, that's really kind of an urgent need for more dynamic defense strategy to prevent breaches, right? And really driving a call for security teams to ultimately shift left. And that goes all the way to the C-level suite. As we look through that to help identify and address the risk throughout the full life cycle of an API, and really protecting, everything from code to cloud across multiple environments, whether that's private cloud, hybrid cloud, or public cloud. So Chuck, look at you first. Is like, what does shifting left mean, and how is it really, addressing the API security challenges today?
It's a great question. We've heard the shift left term for a long time in IT. I've been on IT over 20 years. We've been talking about shift left, and typically the context was around the cost to remediate bugs. It's so much cheaper early in the process. That's all still true. What APIs change is that because you're actually exposing your business logic programmatically, there are a lot of inline devices that you may put in front of APIs that do different things: API gateways, API management systems, load balancers, and so forth. And understanding the resultant set of security posture is very difficult when you only look at things through one single lens. So the way the API security industry was formed, to your point about attackers, actually the first founders of the first API security company were former attackers that realized they can operate with nearly impunity. The first generation of API security products really started looking at production traffic only as a way to try to reverse engineer what's happening in an API space. And what we learned is that's a really important lens, but it's an insufficient lens to gain enough context without a lot of false positives and without missing things, to actually give intelligent direction to teams to allocate their resources. How do you fix this? And because this business logic is being exposed directly from the applications and from the code bases, sometimes to fix these vulnerabilities, you have to actually fix the code. And so finding the vulnerabilities, finding the APIs where they're actually created, and giving that specific feedback back to the development teams is really required to effectively mitigate these types of risks that are specific to APIs that aren't covered by the old models they're still valid, but they're not really, they don't cover APIs as well, like the OWASP top 10 for web, but that comes up, from 2003. That's over 20 years old now. Those are still valid, but APIs produce new risks that also need to be factored in. And the way to find those things is actually in the code base, and putting that whole picture together with context is critically impactful, or is critically important, because otherwise there's just too many false positives and you miss too many things. A single lens approach for APIs just isn't enough to give you enough visibility and context. You need to shift left, and you need to monitor what's happening to the outside as well.
Yeah, no, great points. And I think it's even important to point out that as organizations shift left, it's a lot less expensive to fix something in code before it goes into production, rather than waiting until it goes into production to obviously put that increase in your attack surface, increase in cost, but also the potential for an outage due to bad code changes, and things like that as kind of a reaction. So Traci, any thoughts on your side to kind of share around that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of echoing your point, Clan, I think a secure build is so much more powerful than trying to clean up afterwards. It's obviously less expensive, and it's the right thing to do. So that's something we focus on very much at WWT. We even have internally kind of an approach where we're not just driving security outcomes, we're driving all of the outcomes that we're building for our customers securely. And that really speaks to the build. One of the things that I kind of wanted to highlight, because I know when we were kind of first getting into this topic, we were talking about the proliferation of AI and how that, relates to API security. So one of the things that I did want to point out is right now we're working on this massive, essentially an innovation center, which is our AI proving ground, that F5 is very much involved with us in, as well as some of the largest players in this space. And what we have the opportunity to do that's very unique is prove out a lot of these scenarios and be able to really test out these different technologies in a safe pre-production environment, so we can then deliver those to our customers. So as we kind of start thinking about it in this vein, I'd love to kind of ask you, Chuck, where you guys are going with your AI roadmap, because, internally we find that extremely interesting. We're partnering very closely with you, but I think it'd be a cool thing to share with our audience, kind of the way that you guys are looking at that lens, and then how you guys are also interacting with the AI proving ground as well.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. Some of the joint efforts in the proving ground that we're talking about, like with NVIDIA, like with NetApp, that we're working with jointly with WOT, are very important for us. We're heavily investing in not only the AI and the machine learning that we've been putting in F5's products since 2006, but also effectively leveraging generative AI within our tool stack and helping our customers architect their own AI models, putting inference at the right places, designing their RAG processes, and understanding how they're building their AI workloads, because these are also just modern apps. They're the most modern of modern apps, but there's another set of threat surfaces that come with AI. And basically, a world of AI is a world of APIs. This is how these models all work. So in the future, where we're thinking of is not only RAG, retrieval augmented generation of AI, but also the next iteration, which is going to be agentic AI, which is, these are AI agents that are doing things on your behalf, working with other agents, and having the telemetry and visibility into the APIs that all of these agents use, both within and outside of your organization, is going to be critically important. And so that's where you see investments in F5 technologies like our AI gateway, as well as using the power of AI to better understand and help with things like rule correlation and expert system analysis. How can I make my environment more effective? How can I make my environment simpler? Easy matters in today's environment. It's super complicated to try to get your arms around your attack surface. And we need to leverage the power of these tools, not only to help with protections, but also help defenders understand the complexity of their environment. Those are some areas that F5 is putting a lot of interest in with our partners like WWT. It's a fascinating space to be a part of.
Yeah, Traci, you bring up a really good point. As you kind of look back at secure by default, right? It's like DevSecOps is a culture. It is not a technology, right? So if we bring everybody together, from developers to AppSec teams to network security teams to edge security teams, risk and compliance, and you really bring everything in, right? It is a large ecosystem. It's a lot of people. And I think it really kind of, talks to the need for culture and security to secure by default. It needs to become a responsibility of all. And as you kind of look through, I'm curious to hear from you, how WWT is really looking through our lens and consulting and advising customers on really how to develop a mature cybersecurity posture that's resilient and ready for like the unknown attacks and risk of emerging technologies that the AI will bring in the future as it's churning out exploits in a matter of minutes or hours instead of days and weeks and months. So Traci, I'm curious to hear how WWT is approaching this from a consulting angle and advising customers on how to really create a mature cybersecurity posture that's holistic in nature.
Yeah, I think you hit on so many of the core principles of how we can add value to looking at this from a full life cycle process. So, when we talk about secure development and beyond, it's really a lot of it's about removing silos within the organizations that we support. And so anytime that we do an engagement, so like whether it's an app security or API security assessment, just to kind of level set on where they are, one of the key components of this is actually bringing together all of the stakeholders and making sure that everyone who is touching that in the organization is on the same page, and giving them an opportunity to see their current state and provide that visibility across the organization. So when we sit down at the table together and say, this is where we're at currently, because we know that we know that all the apps have been developed for a very long time. So we're going to be hitting them midstream no matter when we engage. But it's level setting on where they're at today, coming up with a shared vision based on our experience with other large organizations to help them develop a strategy going forward and execute on it in an accelerated fashion. And that's really where we step in and drive the most value. One of the other cool things, just from like a tactical perspective, is we saw, especially during the last 5 years, the ability to test scenarios in a customer zone environment is really challenging, just because the human capital to get these things running, as well as the physical capital in the data center. That can be hard to come by, and it also usually has like long timelines associated to it, just because you've got things like security risk assessments and all of the other stuff that goes into truly kicking off the technology testing. So our other huge value is leveraging the ATC. So being able to do multi OEM bake-offs as we really define what tooling needs to go into that environment to drive those outcomes. It really accelerates the entire process for our customers. You've got hands-on support from WWT, and then you have also all of the learnings from all of the other testing scenarios that we've done with other big customers. So it's just a huge help and really gets us to an outcome so much faster. So it's pretty exciting stuff, and I think it probably leads into the next portion of our conversation, which is really about the customer outcomes that are driven from both sides.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Traci. And I think, one thing is, Chuck, I want to kind of hear your thoughts there is how are you approaching, from a consultative approach to customers, just because F5 has changed so much over recent years with acquisitions and really shifting from what was, in core known as a load balancing company, and really has shifted their persona to security. I'm interested to hear kind of from your side, how is F5 leaning into that? And then also, how are you leveraging partners like WWT and partnerships like that to kind of help move customers forward in this new emerging, cybersecurity world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And starting with the customer needs, I think really is the critical part here. So many customers of all shapes and sizes, they don't really know what sort of exposure they have today. And so helping them either directly from F5 or through partners like WWT, to starting with things like discovery, just understanding what does your attack surface look like? How worried do I need to be about this? Defenders are already overwhelmed. IT teams are already overwhelmed. They don't have extra resources to go, chasing things that may not be a concern. So how do we understand what their actual exposure looks like? And then, there's an old saying in security that if you think technology will solve all your security problems, you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the problems. It's not all about just buying a tool and slapping it in and calling it done. I don't mean to make the process seem overly daunting, but there is a maturity journey here, right? You have to understand what your attack surface looks like. How serious does this need to be? How do you get your arms around it? And then how do you improve the processes to catch up and keep up with the pace of change, such that the fixes will stick? API security is not a one-time engagement at the end of 90 days. You're done, because your applications continue to change. How do we work with our customers? This is where the partnership and the consultative, starting with understanding how the customer business works, what their priorities are, helps us to allocate efforts towards that catching up and keeping up, so that they're really exposing their attack surface on purpose and in a way that's easy to explain and easy to defend. It's very difficult for enterprises to defend their apps and APIs in two different ways without this complete ongoing inventory. One, operationally, you can't defend it because you literally can't see it. Two, post breach, it's very difficult to defend that you were exercising your due diligence or your due care if you have interfaces exposing customer data that are ungoverned and unmonitored. So we try to prioritize based on what's actively being used, where's the data going, and narrow down to where you need to focus on first, and then next, and then next, and then next. So aligning all that is really important. I think that's where the relationships and the partnerships come in super valuable.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I think it brings a couple funny thoughts to mind for me as, I look back on my IT career as you say that, and it's kind of that slow down to speed up model, as well as, you kind of looking at that's a technical solution to a management problem.
Yeah.
Right. Is there seems to be a lot of that. There's so much tool sprawl, and that's what's driving a lot of tools consolidation, and really is where our ATC comes in so strongly, because there's so many, tool sets, including F5, that have really become, whether it's through merger and acquisition or innovation, that there's a lot of tools consolidation and platform consolidation that you can roll through. So that's something that we test a lot in ATC. And it actually leads me to the next question of, kind of looking at, are you familiar with any good success stories or case studies where F5, WWT have really looked at a practical way of securing APIs for our customers for a nice scalable solution? Are you aware of any of those, Chuck or Traci?
Yes. So we've got one just from a little bit earlier this year, a big healthcare provider we work with jointly. It's out on the WWT website. And it's a common story. big complicated environment, lots of blind spots, thousands of VPN connections terminating all over the place. And F5 and WWT were able to work together to consolidate and simplify that attack surface, put the API and web app protection in front of things, have that consistent security posture exposed in all of the cloud environments where this healthcare company was operating in, and really add simplicity to their operations. So going back to the earlier point about, technology can't solve all of your problems, thoughtful technology design, thoughtful product design that understands the problems and can help multiple stakeholders answer the what's in it for me question, like why should I play along? That does help. So choosing the right tools for the right audiences for the right problems is very important. And that healthcare example is a really good one. They had a lot of sprawl that they need to get under control, and we were able to do that working together. It's a good one just from earlier this quarter.
So Traci, that was a great story, that Chuck kind of shared with a mutual case study for a healthcare customer, really making an impact and progress towards securing their APIs and their network. For those watching, I'm kind of curious what you would have to share around starting, with an API journey and kind of API security for our customers. Like, what are some thoughts and takeaways from that you feel kind of come from WWT and our partnership with F5?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think a lot of times when we're starting these types of initiatives, we're helping our customers react to the market, and it's a super crowded landscape of tools. So I think just really leveraging the partnership that you have with us to understand what's available to you, really identify your core use cases so we can start really narrowing down that criteria and understand the tool sets that are going to be helpful for you, and then how to leverage those to drive really successful adoption. I think those are kind of like the critical foundational pieces for it. And for us, we're so fortunate to have such a strong understanding of F5's portfolio, and we've had such successful adoption rates of this type of technology. We can just really drive a lot of value in helping you overcome any hurdles that you might run into and learnings from their customers. So that's one thing. Additionally, we get back to the fundamentals of cyber, just really in many ways, which is really understanding that you can't secure what you can't see. So I think the critical first element to any types of these programs is doing a thorough discovery phase in the part of your app security lifecycle, in understanding what your environment looks like today, so that way you can start putting together a plan, with your core working group of how you want to approach the project. And then, from a fundamentals perspective, and we're thinking about prioritization, from the executive level, it's really putting your heads together and committing to adopting an initiative around creating a secure app and API program, and really committing to maturing that, just because it's going to be so foundational for all of the innovative technologies that the organizations are going to be adopting going forward. So I know we talked a little bit about AI, but it's all API driven. So really getting a firm handle and committing to understanding your environment and maturing it, I think is just going to be critical for success and also faster innovation.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And it kind of leads me to you just reflect on what a lot of what we've discussed here today, and really basing on this conversation. Like, Chuck, maybe we start with you as we look to wrap up here. What are 2 to 3 takeaways that viewers should kind of leave with from this, from F5's perspective?
There's a couple that I think are key, really echoing and reinforcing some of the things that Traci just mentioned. One, really, even though the technology changed, the security fundamentals don't. You can't protect what you can't see. And when you think of just like sort of basic security architecture methodologies like threat modeling, you need to understand assets, actors, interfaces, and actions. Who's doing what to what via what. The I in API is interface, right? It's back to security fundamentals. You need to understand who's doing what to what via what across these interfaces. And the one critical thing that I would ask defenders not to do is to assume that your current technology stack somehow magically covers this, when it wasn't built necessarily for APIs. The OWASP API Top 10 was only first released, the first version, in 2019, just re-updated in 2023. This attack surface is different. So, I see a lot of CISOs and a lot of defenders saying, well, I have a WAF. I understand. API, there's a category of API attacks that your WAFs were not designed to understand. So Don't assume that you're covered. Don't panic, but also start with understanding, start with discovery, start with getting your arms around your API attack surface, and understand that ultimately to solve this is modern app security. API security is not a little niche anymore. API traffic is 90% of web traffic, and it's 90% of the attacks that we see against distributed cloud. So start small, get your arms around it, and then think towards a longer term maturity model, because this is just how modern apps are built.
Well, that does it. Thank you both so much. As this kind of wraps up this episode of Partner Spotlight, definitely want to thank you, Traci and Chuck, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to have this important conversation as a very relevant topic for our customers and partners alike. And definitely thank you to all the viewers for tuning in to WWT.com. Till next time, thank you and stay secure all together.